Toronto winters have a way of settling into your bones, like a truth you try to ignore but can't escape. On the morning of my 29th birthday, that cold felt sharper, heavier, as if the city itself already knew what I didn't, that this day would carve a permanent line between the life I thought I had and the truth I could never unlearn. I arrived at the Sterling House, a restaurant that looked like it belonged in a European royal court rather than on a street corner in downtown Toronto. Frost clung to the windows, blurring the view of linen-covered tables and polished cutlery. Everything was golden, slow, elegant. Everything was expensive. I hesitated at the door, because this place wasn't for me. Not for someone who still compared grocery store prices and worked double shifts at a marketing firm that treated me like a walking to-do list. But my parents had insisted on this place. "It's a family tradition, Claire," my mother had said sharply, as if the price tag was irrelevant and my discomfort inconvenient. A part of me wanted to argue. The other part, the part still carrying childhood lessons about obedience and guilt, simply agreed. I always did. So I pushed open the door. Warm air washed over me, thick with truffle oil and quiet wealth. A soft piano hummed from speakers hidden somewhere near the ceiling. The restaurant felt like a place where secrets weren't spoken, just swallowed. My mother spotted me first. She sat rigidly upright in a cream blazer, every strand of hair pinned with soldier-like precision. Her smile flickered, polite and tight, beautiful but cold, like a snow-covered statue. My father was beside her, scrolling through work emails even on my birthday. His tie was loosened just enough to suggest he had made time for this dinner. Their chairs were angled inward, a united front without warmth. As I sat, they offered the same thin smiles they always did. Not hostile. Not loving. Just performing. "Happy birthday, Claire," my mother said, kissing my cheek without letting her lips actually touch me. My father finally looked up from his phone. 29, he said, nodding once, as if acknowledging a statistic instead of a daughter. I opened the menu even though I knew I'd be ordering the least expensive thing on it. Somehow, birthdays with my parents always came with a strange, invisible price. For a moment, everything seemed normal, the kind of normal I had grown up with, silent expectations, unspoken tension, and a sense that I was always one mistake away from disappointing them. And then, the door opened. A gust of cold air swept inside, and all three of us turned. My grandfather, Howard Beaumont, mining tycoon, family patriarch, the only person who had ever talked to me like I mattered, walked in with the presence of a glacier breaking off a mountainside. Slow. Powerful. Impossible to ignore. My mother's spine stiffened. My father's face drained of color. Something unspoken passed between them, panic. I rose instinctively. "Grandpa?" His eyes softened at the sight of me. He kissed my forehead, warm and familiar, and patted my cheek like he used to when I was little. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." His voice was rough, but gentle. Full of something my parents rarely gave me, sincerity. He took the seat beside me, ignoring the anger radiating from my parents. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, then lifted his glass of water like a man preparing for a toast. And then the moment arrived. The moment that would detonate the life I knew. His eyes didn't leave mine when he spoke. "So, Claire, how have you been using your $2.8 million education trust?" The words sliced through the room like a blade through silk. I froze. My fork slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the expensive white tablecloth. Every sound in the restaurant seemed to vanish, no clinking plates, no soft piano, no murmured conversations. Just a ringing silence pressing against my ears. What trust? The question came out too small, too fragile. My mother's hand tightened around her champagne flute. My father blinked rapidly, his jaw twitching once, twice, his tail, the same one he had when he lied about business trips that weren't business. Grandpa leaned back slowly, studying their reactions with a calm intensity that made my stomach twist. "The trust," he repeated. "The one I gave your parents to manage. The one meant to pay for your schooling, your first home, your career. The one you were supposed to receive on your 25th birthday." My breath stuttered. My chest tightened. I turned to my parents, searching their faces for denial, explanation, something. But what I saw was worse than guilt. It was fear. My mother spoke first, her voice shaky but cloaked in practiced confidence. "Dad, this isn't the time." "It's the perfect time," he cut in sharply, his voice suddenly thunder. "The truth has waited long enough." My father finally set his phone down. "Howard, listen." "No," Grandpa said, his voice low and dangerous. "You listen. Claire deserves the truth. She deserved it 4 years ago. 4 years ago. When I turned 25. When everything went wrong. I remembered that birthday clearly, the one where my parents had told me they couldn't help financially anymore. The one where I was forced to take out loans. Work extra hours. Delay my dreams. Abandon grad school. Move back home for a while. All while thinking it was because they couldn't afford to support me. But now, a cold, nauseating realization hit me. They could have. They just chose not to. My mother's lip trembled. "Claire, please, let us explain." But I didn't want their words anymore. I wanted the truth. "Did you take it?" My voice cracked in the middle. "Did you spend the trust?" Their silence was my answer. And silence hurts more brutally than any confession. My grandfather closed his eyes for a brief moment, like a man grieving something he had already known but hoped wasn't true. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter. "Claire, the trust was meant for you alone. They were supposed to manage it responsibly. Instead—" "Stop," my mother snapped, panic breaking her composure. "This isn't fair." "Is it fair," Grandpa said, anger simmering beneath his words, "that Claire has been struggling while you live in a 5-bedroom house, take vacations to Capri, and drive a Lexus you claimed your company provided?" My heart dropped. "How did you?" my father began. "I know everything," Grandpa said. "I hired an investigator when Claire told me she couldn't afford graduate school. When she said she was drowning while you two seemed unaffected." My mother finally cracked. Tears began to pool in her eyes. The same eyes that had always frozen when I cried as a child. "Dad, we were going to tell her." "When?" he demanded. "When the money ran out? When she turned 40? When she asked again why you couldn't help her?" My throat burned. Every cold dismissal. Every time they told me life is expensive. Every moment I believed they were struggling too. All of it had been wrapped in lies. My grandfather reached for my hand. "Claire, the trust was untouched when I gave it to them. $2,812,000. From what I can see now." He exhaled shakily. "Most of it is gone." My stomach dropped as if the floor had disappeared under me. Gone. 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 My parents sat frozen, caught between shame and self-preservation. My father opened his mouth as if to apologize, but nothing decent ever formed. And that's when the final truth hit me. This wasn't a birthday dinner. It was an ambush. Not from my grandfather, but from reality itself. The life I thought I had, the parents I thought I knew, collapsed beneath the weight of one question. And as the chandeliers flickered above us and snow whispered against the windows, I realized something else. This was only the beginning. Because when the truth finally surfaces after years of betrayal, someone always pays the price. And it wasn't going to be me anymore. The walk from the dining room to the private lounge felt like crossing a battlefield. The restaurant's lights seemed too bright, too exposing. I could feel every eye on us, my grandfather's heavy footsteps, my parents' stiff silence, my own heartbeat pounding loud enough to shake the gold-trimmed walls. The maitre d' led us into a small, dimly lit room tucked behind a velvet curtain. A chandelier hung low above a mahogany table, reflecting soft amber light across the glossy surface. The door clicked shut behind us. That sound, the soft, final click, felt like a lock sealing the four of us inside the truth. My parents took their seats opposite me. Their faces were pale. My mother clenched a linen napkin like she wanted to tear it in half. My father's left eye twitched, that same nervous flicker that had followed him around for years like a shadow he couldn't shake. Grandpa didn't sit. He planted his palms on the table, leaning forward like a man who had waited too long for justice and was no longer willing to wait another second. "Claire," he said, "before we go any further, I want you to understand one thing. You did nothing wrong." My throat tightened. I nodded, but the words barely penetrated the fog of disbelief choking my thoughts. My mother reached for my hand across the table. "Please," she whispered. "Let us explain." I pulled my hand back. Her face collapsed in hurt, but even that felt like another performance. My father cleared his throat. "Claire, things weren't as simple as your grandfather makes them sound. You don't understand the full situation." Grandpa turned on him, eyes sharp as broken ice. "Oh, I understand perfectly. The difference is that Claire finally deserves to hear it." He looked at me. "Claire, your parents received the trust fund when you were 18. I told them specifically, the money is for her university, her first home, and her career. Nothing else." My mother whispered harshly, "Dad, we know." He ignored her. "When you enrolled in university, I expected them to draw from the trust. Instead, he gestured at my parents, they claimed they were saving it for later. They paid your tuition out of pocket but refused to show me the trust statements." I felt dizzy. That wasn't what they told me. They told me finances were tight. They told me to work part-time. They told me to take fewer classes per semester to relieve the burden. "Why didn't you give the money to me directly?" I asked quietly. My grandfather's face softened with pain. "Your parents insisted it would distort your work ethic. They said you needed to understand responsibility, not be handed everything on a silver platter. I trusted them." He swallowed hard. "I shouldn't have." My heart clenched. All those nights juggling homework and shifts at the grocery store. All the humiliation when my debit card declined over a $3 coffee. All the shame when I had to tell friends I couldn't afford outings. All because they were saving it for later. But later never came. My father leaned back, finally speaking with the tone he used in every argument, calm, patronizing, rehearsed. "Yes, mistakes were made," he said, "but not the ones you think. We intended to use the money wisely. We planned investments. Opportunities. We were trying to build a future for all of us." "A future?" Grandpa snapped. "You bought a vacation condo in Ottawa and a timeshare in Barcelona." My mother bristled. "Those were temporary decisions." "Temporary?" Grandpa barked. "They were luxury purchases." My mother's voice climbed in desperation. "We thought we could pay it back." "When?" Grandpa demanded. "Before or after the market crashed?" I blinked. "The market crashed?" Grandpa's jaw tightened. 3 years ago. They invested your trust aggressively. High-risk accounts. Real estate speculation. And when everything collapsed, so did the money meant for your life. My stomach twisted. This couldn't be real. I looked at my parents, but they couldn't meet my eyes. For the first time in my life, they looked small. Scared. Guilty. Claire, my father said softly, you've always been strong. You adapted. You survived. We thought. You thought I could handle being broke? I whispered. My mother flinched like the words slapped her. That's not fair. No, I said, my voice now shaking with fury. What's not fair was watching me drown while you sat on a stolen life raft. Silence. But it wasn't empty silence. It was thick. Suffocating. The kind of silence that forms right before something breaks. My grandfather slowly sank into a chair, shoulders heavy. There's more, he said quietly. My breath hitched. More? My hands gripped the arms of the chair, bracing myself. Last week, Grandpa continued, I received an alert. A withdrawal attempt from the trust's emergency reserve. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father looked like he might be sick. Grandpa's eyes locked on them. Care to explain? A chilling stillness filled the room. My father ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. We needed liquidity, he murmured. The financial advisor said. No more excuses, Grandpa snapped. Tell her the truth. My mother bit her trembling lip. And then, she said the sentence that shattered the ground beneath me. We were planning to move. What? My voice cracked. We were going to relocate before any of this came out, my father admitted. Start fresh somewhere new. Give ourselves time to get things in order. Somewhere new? Grandpa repeated slowly. You were going to disappear? My mother whispered, only for a while. I stared at them, my pulse hammering in my neck. A cold realization slithered through me. You were going to leave me, I said, barely audible. My father shook his head. Not leave, just put distance between us until things settled. Grandpa slammed his fist on the table. That's abandoning your daughter. You were literally fleeing. The room spun. My parents didn't deny it. Not one word. It hit me like a tidal wave. They hadn't just mismanaged the trust. They hadn't just lied. They hadn't just betrayed me. They were ready to run from the consequences. To disappear. To leave me alone. Again. My mother's voice cracked. Claire, please believe us, we didn't want to hurt you. We were scared. The irony stung like acid. They were scared? I stood abruptly. My chair screeched across the polished floor. I can't, my voice shook uncontrollably. I can't breathe. My grandfather rose, reaching for me, but I stepped back. My eyes were burning. My pulse was deafening. My world was collapsing. I pushed through the door and stumbled out into the hallway, gasping like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. But even as my vision blurred, a single, terrifying thought formed in my mind. If they were willing to run, what else were they hiding? And that was the question with an answer I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. But soon. Very soon. Because when secrets start to crack, they never break cleanly. They explode. The hallway outside the private room felt cold and hollow, like the breath before a scream. My thoughts spun in jagged circles, betrayal, abandonment, money, lies. I wasn't sure how long I stood there gripping the wall, trying to keep myself from collapsing. When the door finally opened, it wasn't my parents who emerged. It was Grandpa. He stepped toward me slowly, the way you approach a wounded animal, careful, apologetic, steady. Claire, he murmured, come back inside. There's something we need to show you. I didn't want to go back in that room. I didn't want to see their faces, faces I had trusted my whole life. But something in Grandpa's eyes, a mixture of sorrow and something heavier, darker, made me follow him. Inside, another person had arrived. A woman. Tall, sharp-featured, wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked like it was cut from storm clouds. She closed a leather portfolio as I walked in. Grandpa pulled out a chair for me. Claire, he said, this is Darlene Cho. My attorney. My parents stiffened instantly. My father muttered, is that really necessary? Yes, Grandpa said coldly. It is. Darlene opened the folder again. The rustle of paper echoed like a judge cracking a gavel. She adjusted her glasses. Claire, what I'm about to read is the complete financial summary of your trust fund. No interruptions. My parents stayed silent this time. Darlene spoke with the precision of a surgeon. Trust fund established, September 18, 1996. Initial deposit, $900,000. Additional contributions over 18 years. Birthday deposits. Education bonds. Tax-sheltered growth plans. 2 real estate dividends rolling into the trust. She turned a page. Projected value by your 25th birthday, $2.8 million. My heart thudded unevenly. Hearing the number again didn't make it easier. Darlene's voice didn't waver. Current remaining balance, $87,421.16. The room went unnaturally quiet. It wasn't silence. It was the sound of something inside me breaking. 87,000. Out of almost 3 million. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling under the table. Darlene continued as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb between us. These are the recorded withdrawals over the last 12 years. She read each one slowly, giving every word enough space to hurt. $320,000 for the renovation of your ski chalet in Whistler. My mother stared at the table. Her fingers trembled around her napkin. $89,000 for a luxury SUV. My father's jaw tightened. $410,000 invested into a drone startup registered under your father's name. He closed his eyes. $52,000 paid to a cosmetic clinic membership for Mrs. Beaumont. My mother whispered something. It sounded like I didn't know it was that much. Darlene kept going. $28,000 for a 14-day Alaskan cruise. I remembered seeing those photos on Facebook. They said it was a gift from a client. And lastly, she paused, turning another page, $1.1 million combined toward 2 properties in Vancouver Island, both registered solely under Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont. My stomach twisted. Each line was another betrayal. Another reminder of how many times I had asked for help and been told we can't. Another proof that they had chosen comfort over their own daughter's future. Darlene looked at me gently. These are just the documented withdrawals. Just. As if this list wasn't long enough to bury me. My mother suddenly exhaled shakily, her composure cracking. We only used it because we were desperate, she said. We always planned to replace it. With what money? Grandpa demanded. Your drone company collapsed. Your investments tanked. You kept spending even when the trust was drying up. We thought we'd recover, my father snapped, his voice rising. We thought we'd turn things around. I stared at him. You thought, I whispered, but you didn't stop. Not once. Not when I struggled. Not when I begged. Not even when I told you I had to drop out of graduate school. My mother's lips quivered. That was your choice. My choice? I almost laughed. No humor. Only disbelief. You told me we couldn't afford it, I said. You told me I needed to build resilience. You said I needed to understand the value of money. Grandpa sucked in a breath through his teeth. My father slammed both palms on the table, not in anger but desperation. Claire, he said, voice shaking, you don't understand what it's like to raise a child. We sacrificed for you for years. That was the moment I saw it. The truth. Not just that they had stolen from me, but that they didn't think they had. They believed it was theirs. That I existed because of them. Thus, everything I was supposed to have belonged to them. It was entitlement dressed as parenting. I whispered, voice raw, you left me drowning. My father's jaw flexed. His eyes hardened. And then he said the sentence that severed whatever connection we still had. We gave you life. Isn't that enough? The world seemed to tilt. Grandpa shot up from his chair so fast it nearly toppled. That is not love. Stealing from your child is not love, he roared. What you did wasn't sacrifice, it was exploitation. My mother started crying. But her tears weren't for me. I could see it clearly now. Her tears were for money. For the life of luxury slipping through her fingers like sand. A life built on my future. I sat frozen. Not crying. Not screaming. Just empty. Grandpa lowered himself back into the chair, his voice trembling now, not with anger, but with grief. Claire, he said softly, there is one final matter. My gaze lifted. Even Darlene seemed to brace herself. Grandpa reached across the table, palm open, not forcing, just offering. If you want to press charges, he said quietly, I will stand with you. Every step of the way. The air in the room thickened. My mother let out a strangled sob. My father's face drained of every trace of color. I wasn't looking at my parents anymore. I was looking at two strangers. Two strangers who had buried my future for the sake of their comfort. Two strangers who had planned to run when their lies caught up to them. Two strangers who now waited, not out of love or fear of losing me, but fear of consequences. The weight of Grandpa's words pressed against my chest. Do you want to press charges? My world had already collapsed. My trust in them, destroyed. My life trajectory, altered beyond repair. And yet, even with all their damage, even with their selfishness, a part of me still struggled. Because pressing charges wasn't just a legal choice. It was choosing to set fire to whatever remained of our family. But maybe it was already burning. My mother's voice trembled. Claire, sweetie, please, don't do this. We're your parents. My father's eyes hardened, cold, proud, unyielding. Think carefully, he warned. Once you start something like this, you can't go back. He still thought he had leverage over me. He still didn't realize he'd already lost me. I looked at them both. Really looked. And for the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. Not as victims. Not as authority. But as people who had betrayed me willingly. Knowingly. Repeatedly. I inhaled slowly, my chest aching. And then I opened my mouth to speak. But before the words left my lips, before I could decide between justice and destruction, Darlene's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Her eyes widened. She stood abruptly. Mr. Beaumont, she said to my grandfather, we have a problem. Everyone froze. My pulse hammered. A problem? Now? Before I could make my decision? What kind of problem? Grandpa asked. Darlene's voice dropped to a whisper. The Vancouver Island property, it was sold this morning. My parents shot to their feet. What? My mother shrieked. No, my father whispered, horror spreading across his face. It can't be. Darlene closed her portfolio. The funds have already been transferred. Transferred where? To whom? For what? My heart stopped. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. This was the beginning. Of something darker. Of something bigger. Of a truth none of us were ready for. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at my grandfather's office, and I still couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces, my mother's fake smile, my father's tight jaw, the way they had treated me like a bank account instead of a daughter. The thought that they had almost gotten away with it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't experienced since I was a teenager, scraping together rent and instant noodles while they lounged in their Whistler chalet. Then came the summons. Grandpa's assistant, Darlene, called in the morning. Claire, Mr. Beaumont requests your presence at his Muskoka home. Snow's heavy, so be careful. Muskoka. The mere thought of the lake, frozen over, the tall pines dusted in snow, made me shiver. But it wasn't cold outside that day that unsettled me, it was what awaited me inside. I drove through the frost-bitten roads, my hands clenched on the steering wheel. The lake shimmered beneath thin ice, sun struggling to pierce through the gray winter sky. Muskoka always felt peaceful, almost timeless. Today, though, the calm was a lie. This lake reflected not serenity, but confrontation. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and polished wood. My parents were seated in the main living room, their posture stiff, their expressions hollow. My father's hands shook as he folded them across his lap. My mother's makeup was smeared under her eyes, giving her a drawn, almost haunted look. They didn't rise to greet me. They didn't even glance in my direction. Grandpa cleared his throat. They want to negotiate, he said, voice calm but firm. I sank into a chair across from them. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, the slight creak of the floorboards, the cold wind brushing against the window panes. My father leaned forward first. Claire, we're sorry, he said. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the mask of control he always wore. We made mistakes. But we are your family. You wouldn't put us in prison, would you? My mother added in a whisper, voice cracked and fragile, please, we have nothing left. We're asking, we're begging. For a brief moment, a tiny, foolish part of me wanted to soften. For an instant, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then my mind drifted back to the nights I had spent shivering in my tiny Toronto apartment, too proud, or too stubborn, to beg them for help. I remembered the unpaid rent notices tucked between my sketchbooks. I remembered the birthday dinners I had eaten alone, staring at empty chairs where they should have been, pretending to be proud, pretending to care. I remembered the words my mother had said when I lost my first job, maybe this will teach you to save better. No. I couldn't forgive that. Not now. Not ever. I stood, letting the chair scrape against the wooden floor. You left me with nothing, I said, voice steady despite the storm inside me. Now you live with nothing. The words landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. My mother staggered back as if someone had slapped her. My father lowered his head, jaw tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Grandpa nodded to Darlene. Proceed, he said. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Accounts were frozen. Assets were seized. The lake house my parents had adored, with its heated floors and wine cellar, was stripped from them. The ski chalet, gone. The luxury SUV, gone. Every trace of the life they had built on my trust vanished like smoke in the wind. I watched silently, feeling a cold, hollow satisfaction. Not triumph. Not relief. Just the stark, heavy knowledge that justice had finally begun to be served. And then came the twist. Grandpa reached across the table and pressed a small, heavy envelope into my hands. I frowned. "What is this?" He smiled faintly, but there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "Open it." Inside, carefully folded, was a deed. A property deed. A chill ran down my spine as I read it. It was a design studio in Toronto. Fully paid. Fully mine. I looked up, blinking rapidly. "Grandpa, why?" He shrugged, trying to appear casual, but I could see the tremor in his hands. "I bought it months ago. Before I even knew what your parents were planning." I felt my throat tighten. You bought this for me? Before all this?" He nodded slowly. "Because I knew you'd create something beautiful. I always did. Even when your parents made mistakes, even when life tried to bury you under their choices, I believed in you." Tears sprung to my eyes, and I pressed my face into his shoulder, letting them fall freely. For the first time in my life, someone gave me something because they believed in me. Not because they wanted something from me. Not because they thought it was their duty. Simply because they trusted me, and because they loved me. We sat like that for a long moment. The wind outside whistled through the tall pines, brushing against the windows, but inside it was warm. My grandfather held me, and I felt the tension that had gripped my chest for months begin to loosen. Madison's words from years ago echoed in my mind. Sometimes, the people who believe in you when no one else does, they're the ones who will carry you through. I finally pulled back, wiping my cheeks. "Grandpa, I don't even know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "You just need to promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Promise me you'll build. Not just for money, not just to prove them wrong. Build because you love it. Build because it's yours." I nodded, a lump in my throat. "I promise." For the first time, I realized something crucial. The betrayal, the stolen years, the lost money, none of it could take away my ability to create, to shape, to take control of my own life. The design studio wasn't just property. It was a lifeline, a second chance, a statement. I was allowed to exist beyond the shadow of my parents' selfishness. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, letting out a small sigh. "You've carried too much alone," he said softly. "Let someone else fight for you sometimes." His words were simple, but they hit harder than any courtroom sentence. For years, I had been my own anchor, my own protector. I had built walls so high, no one could reach me, no one could see me. But here, with him, I realized I didn't have to carry everything by myself. Outside, snow fell in quiet drifts over Muskoka, settling like a gentle blanket over the frozen lake. I looked out the window, tracing the thin ice with my eyes. Life, like the lake, could freeze, could crack, but underneath, there was always movement, always depth, always the chance for renewal. I turned back to Grandpa. I won't let them ruin me," I said quietly. "Not my future, not my dreams. And I won't let their choices define me anymore." He smiled, faint but genuine. That's all I needed to hear. We left the living room, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not free from anger, not free from hurt, but free to finally start reclaiming what was mine, not just my inheritance, but my identity. As we walked through the snowy garden toward the car, Grandpa put his hand on my shoulder. "Remember, Claire, life isn't always fair. People will try to take from you. But the beauty of it is, you can always choose what to give back. And sometimes, kindness, even in small doses, changes everything. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Outside, the Muskoka Lake glittered faintly beneath the thin winter sun, a reminder that even in the harshest cold, warmth could exist. And in that moment, I realized, the betrayal, the anger, the pain, they were part of my story. But the unexpected kindness, the belief my grandfather placed in me, would define the next chapter. I didn't know what the future held yet. I only knew that I had a studio, a chance, and a man who believed in me. And that, for the first time in a long time, was enough. But the shadow of my parents still lingered. They hadn't vanished entirely. They were reduced, yes, but they were still alive, still plotting, still capable of mistakes, or worse, revenge. The storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. Months slipped past like snow melting on a cold Canadian morning. Muskoka's forests turned from pristine white to muted browns, and the frozen lake cracked with the first signs of spring. Life outside the tall glass windows of Claire's new studio continued, people moved, cars hummed through streets, and the city breathed in its steady rhythm. But inside, Claire's world had been reborn. The design studio, a modest building nestled on a quiet street in downtown Toronto, had once been an empty shell. Now, it vibrated with energy. Walls once bare were painted in neutral tones, punctuated by bursts of color that spoke of creativity and care. Sketches lined the desks, designs hung like trophies, and sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating every corner. For the first time in years, everything she touched belonged to her. Her fingers moved deftly across a tablet, guiding colors and fonts, shaping the identity of a local bakery that had just signed a contract with her. Clients came quickly, small businesses, tech startups, even non-profit organizations seeking a voice that reflected their heart and mission. Each project felt like a declaration. She existed, not as a reflection of her parents' choices, but as Claire Beaumont, a woman whose vision mattered. The early days were exhausting. Long nights followed early mornings. Deadlines loomed like specters. But exhaustion wasn't fear. It wasn't despair. It was the weight of creation, the raw, satisfying effort of building something from nothing. And as the first invoices cleared, as positive feedback trickled in, Claire felt a sense of quiet victory she had never experienced with money that had been stolen from her. Her parents, meanwhile, existed as reminders of the past. Court orders had forced them into restitution, $600 a month for their crimes. Just enough to hurt, just enough to remind them that they had been caught, that they had been measured, judged, and found wanting. Claire didn't gloat when the funds appeared in her account. She didn't revel in their loss. But each deposit felt like a heartbeat of justice, a tangible proof that the life they had tried to steal had returned to her, piece by piece. And yet, the shadows of her parents lingered. She sometimes imagined them in that small roadside motel in Oakville, stripped of the comforts they had once hoarded. Would they ever understand the gravity of what they had done? Would they even recognize the daughter they had betrayed? These questions lingered at the edges of her mind like distant echoes, but she refused to dwell on them. There was work to do, and life to build. One evening, as dusk draped Toronto in purple and gold, Claire stood on the balcony of her new studio. Below, the streets glimmered with reflections of street lamps and car headlights. A gentle wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint smell of coffee from the cafe across the street. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the city hum fill her. She was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes after meaningful work, after long nights that end in progress rather than panic. Grandpa appeared silently behind her, a cup of tea in hand. He looked older than before, his hair more silver, his posture still straight but carrying the invisible weight of decades. He handed her the cup without a word, and she accepted it, the warmth of the tea grounding her. "You're stronger than you think," he said finally, his voice low but firm. Claire smiled faintly, eyes tracing the skyline. "I know," she said. "Not because I punished them, but because I rebuilt myself." He nodded, squeezing her shoulder. "That's the real victory. Blood doesn't define family. Loyalty does. Character does. You've learned that the hard way." She closed her eyes and remembered the long, bitter nights of betrayal, the birthdays without love, the empty dinners, the stolen trust fund. But she also remembered the unexpected kindness, Grandpa's quiet support, the studio he had secretly purchased for her, the belief that someone had in her long before she believed in herself. "You taught me to draw the line," she said softly. "To stand up, even when it felt impossible. To take what's mine, but not to take revenge in anger." Grandpa chuckled softly. "That's my girl. Justice isn't about fury. It's about restoration. And you've done that." The wind picked up outside, rattling the balcony railing, and Claire felt the moment stretch. In the distance, the neon lights of a restaurant she once frequented flickered. The place where it had all begun, the confrontation over the trust fund, the night she had finally seen the truth. Couples laughed inside, clinking glasses, oblivious to the storm that had once shaken her world. She didn't go in. Some places deserved to remain burned bridges. Some wounds deserved respect rather than confrontation. Claire had learned that closure didn't always mean revisiting pain. Sometimes, it meant walking away, stronger, quieter, and unbroken. Over the next few months, her life took on a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. Clients continued to come. Word spread about her talent, her reliability, her vision. Madison became a fixture in the studio, helping with organization and sharing moments of laughter that reminded Claire of the joy that came from genuine connections. For the first time, Claire didn't just survive, she thrived. There were setbacks, of course. Small mistakes in design, delayed payments, miscommunications, but these were natural, solvable problems. Not betrayals cloaked as love. Not theft disguised as care. She faced each challenge with clarity, confidence, and the unshakable knowledge that her parents' shadows no longer governed her life. One snowy evening, after a long day of client meetings and design revisions, Grandpa invited her to dinner at his condo in Yorkville. The view was stunning. Lake Ontario glimmered in the twilight, the CN Tower rising like a sentinel above the city. He looked friendlier than before, but there was a light in his eyes, a quiet pride. "You did what I couldn't," he said, as they shared a meal of roasted vegetables and baked salmon. "You drew the line. You reclaimed your life. You proved that resilience is stronger than greed, that integrity outlasts deceit." Claire nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I had to," she said. "It wasn't just about money. It was about proving to myself that I could survive, and even flourish, on my own terms." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Remember this, Claire. There will always be people who try to take from you, who manipulate, who betray. But you will always have the choice, revenge or rebuilding. You chose wisely. And now, you have the freedom to create the life you want." The moment was quiet, profound. Claire understood then that the story wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about her parents' guilt or their restitution. It was about the rise, the moment she finally owned her power, her choices, and her life. The next morning, she drove past the upscale restaurant where the original confrontation had occurred. Inside, laughter, music, the clink of glasses. She didn't enter. She didn't need to. She had burned that bridge months ago, but she no longer carried anger as a weight. It was a chapter closed, a lesson learned, and a life reclaimed. That night, Claire stood in the doorway of her studio, looking at the city through the tall windows. Madison had left for the evening, and the studio was quiet, alive only with the hum of computers and the faint glow of desk lamps. Claire felt a deep, steady calm. For the first time, the future wasn't a source of anxiety. It was a canvas blank, full of possibility, and entirely hers. She picked up her tablet and began sketching, letting her imagination take her wherever it wanted. Designs flowed effortlessly, the fruits of years of restraint, anger, and ambition merging into creations that were entirely her own. The city lights outside twinkled like stars reflected in water, a reminder that even in the harshest winters, light persisted. Before turning off the camera to record her closing message for Venge Tale Story, she looked directly into the lens, her voice calm but firm. If someone ever steals your future, take it back quietly, piece by piece. And when you rise, don't look back. Not in anger. Not in regret. Only forward. Her eyes softened, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. And if stories like mine hit close to home, subscribe. Comment your thoughts, share your experiences, and stay tuned. The next story might feel even closer than this one. But remember, your power is in your choices, and your life is yours to rebuild. She reached for the cup of tea her grandfather had left behind earlier, and as she sipped, the studio felt alive, not just with light and warmth, but with potential, with hope, and with the quiet strength of someone who had faced betrayal, reclaimed their life, and was ready to flourish beyond the shadows of those who tried to hold them back. And so, Claire Beaumont's story concluded, not with vengeance, but with triumph, justice, and a life fully reclaimed. Some chapters deserved to remain closed, but others were only just beginning.